Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben. These are my tomes, and this is everything I've read in the last week. This week is the start of Summerween 2025, and therefore it has been a rather busy week. I feel like my reading has really increased over the last couple of days. But for the first half of the week, I was finishing up Nona the Ninth so I could go into Summerween with a blank slate. Nona the Ninth is the third book in the Locked Tomb series, and probably my favorite at this point. I really like Nona as a character. I read somewhere that this was not intended to be book 3, that book 3 was supposed to just be Alecto the Ninth, which is the last book in the series. Still doesn't have a release date. Came about as kind of an in-between story that the author wanted to tell, and I really liked it. It expands on some of the characters and the lore, plus it has Nona, who is probably my favorite character in the series, if you can call her that, because she is possibly one of several other characters. I won't go into too many spoilers, but it's fairly obvious from the jump that there's something weird going on. Surprise when it comes to a Locked Tomb book. If you've not heard of the Locked Tomb series, the first book in the series, Gideon the Ninth, is a rather straightforward action book, I would say, although it has a pretty cool mystery element to it, and it is set in space with space necromancers, which is pretty cool. But the second book, Harrow the Ninth, really takes a left turn into some really bizarre territory, and I feel like Nona the Ninth is trying to follow in those footsteps, though ultimately comes across as a somewhat more coherent book from the outset. There are some odd stylistic choices. There are sections in here where dialogue is not set off with quotation marks, and there is the choice to have the top corner of the book say Nona the Ninth and then have the Ninth crossed out. Really enjoyed the character, enjoyed the expansion on the world, would highly recommend, gave it 5 stars. It's an excellent series, one of my favorites at this point in time. Another book I read before the Summerween train started rolling was Kakegurui Volume 18. This concludes the backstory of our main character, which I felt was an interesting, although not entirely necessary, plot to put in here. I do appreciate that it is not revealed that she had some sort of uncomplicated, tragic backstory, or that she was out for revenge. Yumiko is, in some ways, the orchestrator of her own miseries, and I feel like that's incredibly appropriate given what we've seen of the character up to this point. I did end up giving this 4 stars along with the previous volume, just because, again, I feel like this backstory arc that has come after a very high point in the series is serving the purpose of slowing things down, but it's not my favorite. I really prefer the arcs where there are games in which you can figure out some kind of trick or some kind of way to get around it or to cleverly play it, and that was not present in the last 2 volumes. A little dip in the quality for me, or the enjoyment for me, but still a very good series if you can get over the rather overt sexualization of the characters. It's one that I think is still telling a compelling story and still feels cohesive as it's moving into its 19th volume. I read Strange House Volumes 1 and 2. This is based off of the novel Strange Houses by Uketsu. And it follows, as far as I can tell, because we have the book as well, it follows the plot of that book pretty closely. This is rather subdued Japanese horror. I would possibly even just call it a thriller, in which there is a floor plan that has some oddities in it, and the characters are trying to figure out, well, why is there this blank space in the house, and what could it lead to, and what conclusions can we draw from that? They're drawing these rather horrific conclusions. I believe that this is likely to go 4 volumes because the book had 4 chapters, and each volume is lining up with those chapters fairly consistently. So I'm about halfway through the story, and it's pretty good. I liked it quite a bit. Not 5 stars. I think I ended up 4 stars for both of these because it was interesting enough and kept me reading. My wife did read the book and said it gets incredibly convoluted and crazy at the end, so I might just end up picking up the book and finishing it that way. But either way, I do intend on reading through the rest of this series. Continuing with the Summerween reads, I looked at Two Truths and a Lie by Sarah Pinsker. This is a short story. I don't even think I would call it a novella. I think the print edition is only 40 pages long. If this story is not inspired by the Pirate Cove creepypasta, I would be really shocked to hear that, because it aligns with that story pretty well if you're familiar with that creepypasta. If not, it's basically the idea of this character makes up a show on the spot because she is a compulsive liar, and she's like, oh hey, do you remember this show, just like throwing it out there as kind of a joke or as this compulsion to say something that isn't true. But then everyone around her is like, yeah, I remember that this thing happened and it was filmed here, and she digs deeper and deeper into this story, this local TV show that has no information anywhere about it, and trying to find out the mystery of this show that she believed she had made up on the spot. A lot of the creepiness comes at the very end of the story, and it's more of an existential dread and existential creepy factor, which I rather enjoyed. Plus, it's only 40 pages, so it wasn't like it was a big investment on my time or anything like that. I would recommend it. It was a lot of fun, especially if you're into that style of creepypasta. I've gotten some recommendations of some other books to look at. Knock Knock Open Wide, which has a similar story, a similar background of this television show that is nefarious in some way. Finally, I did listen to the audiobook for Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. I read Dead Silence for one of the previous Summerweens. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. Gave it 3 stars. Wanted to give S.A. Barnes another shot, and honestly, this was not a very good story for me. It has the rather dubious honor of being my 3rd 2-star book in the entire year. And I think it's just because it doesn't fulfill the promise that it's marketed as, and it's trying to do too many things. And of the things it's trying to do, it does several of them very poorly. So let's start with the first problem. This is billed as a haunted house in space, as a creepy story. And while it initially seems like that's the direction we're heading, with this condition that makes it to where people can't distinguish their dreams from reality and fantasy from reality, and are having a hard time piecing what is happening versus what isn't happening, that whole thread is completely dropped by the midway point of the book in favor of this alien story that I don't really feel worked at all, because it really diminished the mystery of the book. We also have a romance that feels incredibly shoehorned and unnecessary. We have corporate espionage that we have to expose. We have past trauma we've got to dive into. This message of overcoming adversity that we've got to deal with. And then again, we've got this alien plot and this like survival plot. I also never felt like the stakes were very high. Like, several people get into dangerous situations, but there aren't enough characters to have a high body count. I was never that worried that characters weren't going to make it through and we were going to have a happy ending. So for all these reasons, and again, just going into it hoping that it would be something a little bit better than the first essay Barnes that I read, and it ended up being worse, was rather disappointing. I went into this thinking I was going to give essay Barnes another shot. Maybe the first book just didn't hit right for me, or maybe they would do something a little bit different with their sophomore attempt in this universe. But no, it really felt the same. I had a lot of the same issues, just more of them with this second entry. So unfortunate, but that is one of my lower rated books of the year. And that's going to do it for me for this week. Stay tuned to the channel. I'm putting up a lot of shorts for Summerween, and I'll be back later this week with a Summerween check-in as well as Summerween reading sprints on Friday. So look forward to those. Please let me know down in the comments if you're participating in Summerween and what you're taking a look at. And even if you're not, just tell me what's your most recent read. What are you getting into? Have you heard of any of the books I talked about this week? What are your thoughts on them? Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can grow this corner of our BookTube community. And until the next one, take care.